Well, we have all grown up hearing that a person's pride will not just be their downfall, but it will probably also be, if not assuredly will be, the downfall of all of those close to him or her. Well, in his 1937 novel, Absalom, Absalom, William Faulkner brings this maxim to life. And the novel's main novel's main character is a man named Thomas Sutpen. And wherever Thomas Sutpen goes, he creates chaos, death, and heartbreak. As a young man, when he decided to move up in the world, he moved to Haiti to be the overseer of a sugar plantation's enslaved people. And when there was an uprising of these enslaved people against the cruelty of his masters, he saw an opportunity to ingratiate himself to the plantation owner so that he could marry her daughter and inherit the whole thing. And so he put this rebellion down by killing them, killing the rebellious enslaved people. Well, it worked. He married the owner's daughter. A few short years later, the owner died. He sold the plantation, moved to the United States, put his wife and his newly born child in an apartment in New Orleans, and promptly left them. He bought a 100-square-mile plantation up in North Mississippi, took his enslaved people up there to run it, and began to exploit his wealth and his power. Well, fast forward 20 years. He's now married to a new person with a daughter of his own. And this daughter meets a young man and wants to marry him. But when Sutpen realizes who this young man is, it's his firstborn son. He decides that for his legacy's sake, so his name and his legacy can live on, he'll keep his secret to himself and let them marry each other. Well, they marry, they have a child who becomes mentally disabled or who is mentally disabled. And eventually the truth comes out. Well, you don't need to read the rest of Absalom, Absalom to figure out the devastation that this caused, not just to a person or a family, but an entire community. So what would cause Sutpen to be so self-absorbed, to be so not just unethical, but immoral, depraved? Well, it all started when he was a small child, incredibly poor, growing up in what is now the mountains of Virginia. They moved down to the Tidewater area where his father could find work, working for a wealthy plantation owner right in the Tidewater of Virginia. Well, his father sent him to the front door of this plantation owner's home to give him a message. And when he knocked on the front door, the enslaved person who had better clothes on than Sutpen had ever seen in his life told this little white boy to go around to the back door where the rest of the enslaved people have to greet the master. And for the first time in his life, pride entered. Faulkner writes this: so to combat these wealthy people, you have got to have what they have that made them do what he did. You've got to have the land and the slaves and a fine house to combat them with. And then that night he left. He walked before day. He waked before day and departed just as he went to bed, by rising from the pallet and tiptoeing out of the house. He never saw any of his family again. What we have in our story is a story of pride. Well, if you've been with St. Thomas's at all since the beginning of the summer and the fall, you know that we've been walking through Mark's Gospel. And we've just entered into the second part of Mark's Gospel, where we see now, we've answered the question, who is this man Jesus? He's the King, he's the Messiah, he's the one that's come to rescue God's people from enslavement and sin and death. And what's he going to come and do? How's he going to accomplish that? He's going to do it like this. Verse 30 from our reading tells us, "And they went from there and passed through Galilee. And he did not anyone to know, for he was teaching his disciples, saying to them, the Son of Man," which is his favorite title for himself, "is going to be delivered into the hands of men, and they will kill him. And when he is killed, after 3 days he will rise." But they did not understand the saying, and were afraid to ask him. You see, this is the second of 3 times where Christ tells his disciples how he was going to rescue his people from the ultimate oppressor, not the Romans, but from sin and death itself. And as we can see, the disciples are confused. They don't understand this Lord. This doesn't fit into our worldview, how we understand the Messiah to actually work. And we get a greater glimpse as to how much they didn't understand this when we see what they did next. "And they came to a Capernaum, and when he was in the house, he asked them, 'What were you discussing along the way?' asking his disciples. But they kept silent. For on the way they had argued with one another about who was the greatest." In short, when Jesus comes in his kingdom, who's going to get the seat at the right hand of him? Who's going to get the greatest riches? Who's going to get the greatest power? Who is going to be number 2 next to the number 1, Jesus Christ? "And he sat down and called the 12, and he told them, 'If anyone would be first, he must be last of all, and a servant of all.'" See, what Jesus is doing is he is hearing this sin, which is at the heart of every single human being. I have to be the best. I have to be the most important, because if I'm not, then my very life is at stake. I have to solidify my place. I have to be number 1 where the world serves me, just like Setpin. But then Jesus reorients them, helps them to understand what's happening here, and he flips this model, not only to teach them how to be his disciples, but more importantly, to give them an insight onto what he has come to do for them and for the world. He who is first must be last. But then to open this up even more using this Hebrew term, a rhetorical device called a parallelism, he says the same thing in 2 different ways. If you want to be first, you have to be last. To all. Last to all the people. If you want to be great, you must be a servant to all. And all of this hinges on that one word, servant. The actual Greek word, I think that our word, just English just can't bring us where this word goes. It's the Greek word diakonos, which is where we get the term deacon from. But it means this. Literally, it means one who serves at table, one who's the cupbearer. But this idiom means so much more. The cupbearer is literally the most trusted servant in the house, because they literally taste the cup of wine. They guard the cup of wine from anyone pouring poison into it, into the wine or into the food. They're literally putting their lives on the line to protect this person. They wash feet. And it's the type of service that's offered not by a hired hand, normally, but by a family member. It's sort of considered like parental love or motherly love. My son was home from college just this past week. He got served, right? Mom has got this boy home. She's taking care of this skinny boy, right? But But there are lots of words in the Greek that means serve. But this one has the unique connotation of the person serves, not because they're getting paid to, not because they have to, but because they absolutely love the person that they're serving. And this made sense to some level. But then Jesus gives an example of exactly what he's talking about here. Look at this. And he took a child and put him in the midst of them. And taking this child in his arms, he said to them, whoever receives such a child in my name receives me, and whoever receives me receives not me, but him who sent me. The role that children played, or that played in first century Palestine 2,000 years ago, was the exact opposite of the role that they play here in Mount Pleasant, right? Kids rule, man. Kids are in charge of all of our lives, right? Everything revolves around them. We're here to support them and take care of them and nurture them, and that's good. Don't stop doing that, right? But all of us have sort of fallen into this trap of where our children become the center of our universe. We're used to serving them. In first century Palestine, it was the total opposite. They weren't really people. They were there to serve us. They were there to work in the fields. They were there to take over the family business. They were there to be apprenticed. And one day, you're only good to me until you begin to provide for the family. But what Jesus is saying is that this worthless child, we need to be a deacon to them. But he ups it because he uses this word receives. And when you see a word repeated over and over and over again, like we have in this verse, you should pay attention to it. And what I love about this word is it literally means to extend your right hand. Extend your right hand. Open yourself up. Make yourself available. Treat them as, and it's primarily used, this word receive is used in like context of hospitality. When someone visits you from afar, you receive them into your home. We're pretty good at hospitality. I've been to your homes. You're wonderful. But we're nothing compared to these folks. If you know Middle Eastern culture, even to this day, they will give you their bed, their last food, their last bottle of wine, their last everything, because you, as their guest, are more important than them. And so Jesus is laying on these different layers of the absolute call that we as Christians have to serve in this world. And to serve not just the people who will benefit us, but the people who don't deserve it. The people who can't pay us back. The people who we, if we do favors for, can do no favors back to us. Now, there's so many wonderful examples, contemporary examples of this kind of a servant heart day in and day out. But one that I like the most, though, is this beautiful woman from the Church of Rio Mena in Nicaragua. I'm going to have her picture come up here. That is Helena Rodriguez of Rio Mena, Church of God of Prophecy. Now, why she's my example, and it's ironic because if you saw the whole picture, she's actually standing up on stage and she's kind of she's taking a public role at that time. But really, the place where she lives is not in public. The place where she lives is in the kitchen. The place where she lives is behind the scenes. The place where she lives is going from house to house to house, making sure that every family has food. The place that as she lives is cutting out little stars for the after-school program. The place where she lives is setting up chairs, is sweeping a rough concrete floor. The place where she lives is giving immediate service when it's needed, where it's needed. Without thought to self, without thought to glory, without thought to how is this going to make me look. And she does this. She serves people who may or may not walk in the doors of her church. She serves children from incredibly poor families who can give nothing back except a hard time. Not because they're poor, but because they're children. That is what a deacon is. Quietly serving, doing the dirty work that no one else wants to for those who deserve it the least. So, what does this mean for us? Well, of course, Jesus calls us to be servants, right? We know that. But I think the real question is that how do we become like this? How do we have a servant's heart? How do we become a deacon? How do we receive those into our lives like the ones that Christ calls us to? Well, let me tell you how we don't do it. We don't do it by just digging down deep and saying, I'm going to make a promise to myself. I'm going to take hold of my life. I'm going to be responsible, and I'm going to be a servant, doggone it. Because when we've done that, what we've actually done is done exactly what the disciples were trying to do. That was totally wrong. When we approach servanthood through that lens, we don't make it about the people we're serving. We're making it about ourselves. It's now a challenge, right? I'm going to do the 30-day servant challenge, right? Well, what does that end up doing? Who does that put the focus on? Me. And now I can glorify myself because I passed that. I checked every day to the 30-day servant, put that up on my wall, and now Jesus loves me. Now I'm going to sit at his right hand. No. The way we become servants is we let ourselves be served. The way we become servants is we let ourselves be served. Served by Jesus. If you've done the Passover Seder meal that we do at St. Thomas's every Maundy, Thursday, the Thursday before Easter, my favorite part of that is actually the foot washing. Because we remember the time where Jesus washed the feet of his disciples. The most servant of servantly jobs. And of course, Peter, who was in here arguing about who was the best one, and Peter knew that he was because Jesus said he was a couple chapters ago. But what Peter says is something which on its face has great piety, right? No, I should not be washing. I will wash your feet. You are the master. And then Jesus once again flips this over on his head and he says this. Unless you let me wash your feet, you have no place with me. That's not just about foot washing, right? This is an acted parable. It's an acted story. The foot washing is a foreshadowing of what's going to happen the next day on the cross. So in the foot, when you come forward to wash your feet, this is why none of you want your feet washed, is I'm asking you to show me the dirtiest part of you, the part that you're most embarrassed about. Your chipped toenail polish job, your ingrown nails, the discolored, right? It's gross. Feet are disgusting. Even in Mount Pleasant, they are disgusting. But what Jesus wants us to do is take the most disgusting parts of ourselves, our sin, our failure, and bring them to him. With the socks off, right there, no hiding it, putting it out there. And we have to do the most difficult thing that a human being could ever do, and that's sit there and let Jesus, the holiest of holies, see the ugly part of us, touch the ugly part of us, and wash it clean. And we can just sit there. We can't even help him. And I wonder how many of us this day were walking in here trying to keep the socks on our soles. I was. Lord, I don't want you to see this part of me. I'm going to come here, I'm going to sit, I'm going to be quiet. I know I don't belong here. I'm going to try to get better. I'm going to try to get better. We're going to try to get better. And he just says, come on, take your socks off of your soul and let me see your heart. Not so I can condemn you, but so I can wash you and clean you by my work on the cross. That's beautiful, isn't it? So if you're having a hard time being a servant, Just go sit and let Christ wash your feet once again, because it's his great joy to make you clean, to make you his. I want to end with this. One more application. There are those of us who are like, yes, that sounds great. But Hamilton, I've been trying to be a servant for so many years, and I find no joy in this. I only come in and I'm convicted because I know I should do all these things, and I just can't do it. Well, one of the other things I want us to take home from this story is look at how Jesus responds to these incredibly stupid servants, disciples. When they come in trying to say who's going to be the greatest amongst us, he doesn't evict them. He doesn't depose them. He doesn't throw them out of the circle of 12. And if we were to go further into this passage, I cut it short because of the humidity, but if we were to go further into this passage, we see it's the great disciple John, the beloved disciple who wrote John's gospel and all of John's letters in the book of Revelation, who actually gets incredibly jealous of other people that are stealing his thunder. They're not part of us, Lord. They're not proclaiming the gospel, and they're not part of us. Make them stop. Did he do that because he loved Jesus? No, he did that because he wanted all the glory. But how does Jesus treat them, the servant Christ? He welcomes them. He forgives them. He's patient with them. And he binds them to himself. That even their own sins cannot cast them out from the presence of Jesus. He grabs them and never lets them go. That's our servant Christ. That's who he is for us. That's who he is for me. And if you want him to be that for you, it's his joy. Just sit down, take off the socks of your soul, and let him wash you clean. And this is good news for us sinners indeed. Amen.